The Gansfield Experiment is a psychological and paranormal test designed to explore extrasensory perception, also known as ESP. Originally developed in the 1960s and 70s, the experiment tested the effects of sensory deprivation on the human brain. Participants would wear halved ping pong balls over their eyes, listen to white noise through headphones, and be bathed in red light. This setup was meant to block out normal sensory input, inducing a mild trance or a hallucinatory state. In this state, some researchers believe that subjects might be more open to telepathic messages or subconscious thoughts. In the Creepypasta version, the narrator recounts his personal experiments with the Gansfield method, documenting the unsettling visions reported by participants. Some claim to see complex mathematical formulas scrolling across their vision. Others saw distorted faces or disembodied hands reaching towards them. One participant described a gnawing sense of dread, as if something was in the room watching him. The story implies that this experiment might do more than just alter perception. It might open a door. Whether that door leads to the subconscious, another dimension, or God forbid something darker is left unclear. In real life, however, the experiment's connection to supernatural phenomena is purely speculative. The Gansfield setup was indeed used in parapsychology experiments in the 1970s. The goal was to test whether the subjects in a sensory-deprived state could receive images being mentally sent by another person in a separate room. However, when the brain is deprived of input, it can fill the gaps itself, leading to visual distortions, phantom sounds, and a creeping sense of presence. Common ingredients in ghost stories. So, while the Gansfield experiment doesn't open a literal gateway to the paranormal, it does reveal how strange and fragile human perception can be, which to me is a lot more terrifying than the actual story.
Julia Leree was a woman who, according to legend, was mistakenly buried alive in her family's mausoleum in 1852. Years later, when the tomb was reopened, her skeletal remains were discovered huddled near the door, implying that she had woken up inside and desperately tried to escape. The story of her death became one of South Carolina's most infamous ghost stories. In the creepypasta, the OP claims they were locked inside Julia's mausoleum overnight by friends as a cruel prank. As the night progresses, they describe an intense pressure in the air, like being watched by something unseen. Scratching noises echo through the stone chamber, followed by a piercing scream and the sound of a girl sobbing. When the door is finally opened the next morning, the OP is found with streaks of blood across the tomb door and small blood spots on their face as if someone had touched them during the night. Julia Leree was, in fact, a real person who died in 1852 at the age of 23. Though the cause of death is not fully confirmed, many sources suggest she died of diphtheria, a common and often fatal illness at the time. The idea that she was buried alive after slipping into a coma mistaken for death has been widely circulated in folklore but has no confirmed historical evidence. It's worth noting that in the 19th century, fear of premature burial was widespread, and this may have helped fuel the legend.
Indian officials were investigating multiple missing persons reports near a jungle. They stumbled upon a Zoroastrian dogma, a site traditionally used for exposing bodies to the elements. However, this particular dogma holds disturbing anomalies. 1. The bodies found there did not match the descriptions of the missing people, and locals failed to recognize any of them. 2. Unlike typical dogmas, no birds were present to consume the corpses, only maggots and flies. 3. Officials never conducted a full count of the bodies, as they felt uneasy and avoided prolonged investigation. 4. A deep pit in the center contained festering blood, far more than the surrounding corpses could have supplied. 5. When a villager accidentally kicked a bone into the pits, a gas explosion erupted, splashing officials with decomposing blood. Those affected became delirious, ranting about being tainted by a Hirman, or a Zoroastrian embodiment of evil. They later died in quarantine after attacking hospital staff. And 6. When officials returned the next day in hazmat gear, the site was completely empty. The bodies and blood had vanished, leaving only a single photograph as evidence. While the creepypasta is purely fictional, the Tower of Silence is a real procedure dating back to at least the 5th century BCE. The purpose of the tower was to allow human corpses to decompose without contaminating the soil, which was believed to be sacred by the Zoroastrians. However, by the 20th century, the practice was largely abandoned due to urban expansion and changing beliefs.
Charles Manson was, by all means, a completely healthy person. Unfortunately, his wife, Harriet Manson, had developed a rare condition called Capgras delusion, which is the belief that a friend or family member has been replaced by an identical imposter. This belief occurred when she suffered an aneurysm, which severely damaged her brain. In this case, Harriet believed her younger brother, Nolan, was replaced by an imposter, but she mostly kept this to herself. The night before her surgery, she whispered into Charles's ear, "Nolan's gone, Charlie. That's someone else. I don't know who he is, but it's not him. I'm so sorry." Harriet did not survive the surgery. Charles gained custody of Nolan, but for reasons unknown, he too began to believe that the boy was not who he claimed to be. His growing paranoia culminated in a knife attack. Nolan was stabbed 3 times in the chest and stomach, but survived the ordeal. Charles was committed to a mental institution where he remains today. Several years later, Nolan, now a young adult, has forgiven Charles and visits him on his birthdays. Charles, however, had only one thing to say in a recent interview: "The real Nolan would never forgive me." While the story and these characters likely never existed, Capgras delusion is a real psychological condition. It's often associated with schizophrenia, brain injuries, or dementia. However, the story twists this by implying that Charles developed this condition through association with his wife. Merely being told that her brother was an imposter was enough for Charles to land in a mental institution. Thankfully, this seems unlikely, but the condition is very real.
The Sleep Paralysis creepypasta is a short story based on a very real phenomenon. During REM sleep, the body enters a natural state of paralysis, triggered by chemicals that prevent us from acting out our dreams. However, on rare occasions, a person may regain consciousness before their body wakes up, leaving them fully aware but completely immobile. This terrifying state is known as sleep paralysis. Common symptoms include an overwhelming sense of dread, inability to move or speak, hallucinations, tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, sweating, and intense emotional distress. Many people report seeing shadowy figures in the room, feeling a presence looming nearby, or even sensing something sitting on their chest. These experiences are often so vivid that it becomes difficult to distinguish dreams from reality. In the creepypasta, the narrator awakens paralyzed in bed, unable to speak or call out. As their vision adjusts in the dark, they notice something is wrong. Their spouse is lying beside them, but completely still. When the paralysis finally breaks and the narrator is able to move, they realize in horror that their partner is dead. Her throat has been slashed, and her wide, unblinking eyes are frozen in terror.
From 1999 to 2005, a series of unsolved murders supposedly took place in Japan. At each crime scene, a playing card was left behind by the killer, marked with the word Alice written in blood. The 5 known victims were Sasaki Megumi, a 29-year-old restaurant owner, Yamane Akio, a local singer in a small band, Kai Sakura, a teenage girl, and siblings Oshiro Hayato and Hina. While there were a few suspects and even one reported arrest, the killer was never caught, and the murders remain unsolved. That is, of course, just a story. There is no record in Japanese police history of such a case. and the ass killings are widely considered as just a creepypasta. Japanese readers have pointed out that a crime spree of this magnitude would have received widespread media coverage both domestically and internationally. Yet no legitimate news sources or police records exist to back it up. The story appears to be loosely inspired by a real case in Spain involving a serial killer known as the Playing Card Killer. In 2003, Alfredo Galan left playing cards next to his victims at several crime scenes before being arrested and imprisoned. Galan had no ties to Japan and never used the name Alice, but the detail of the card being left behind is strikingly similar.
According to the story, Soviet engineers were drilling deep into the Kola Peninsula in search of oil or natural gas. Their drill suddenly begins to spin wildly, indicating that they had struck an empty chamber deep beneath the earth. Then, intense heat burst forth from the borehole, allegedly reaching temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But the most disturbing part came when they lowered a heat-resistant microphone into the pit. What they reportedly captured were the anguished screams of countless voices crying out in torment. One horrified geologist is alleged to have exclaimed, "We have penetrated into the Earth's core and entered the gates of hell." So, yeah, the Soviet Union did actually drill into the Kola Peninsula in the 1980s. This was a part of a real scientific project known as the Kola Super Deep Borehole, which ultimately reached a depth of over 40,000 feet, making it the deepest man-made hole in the Earth's crust. Scientists encountered unusual rock formations and high temperatures that made further drilling impossible. But that's where the truth ends. The rest, the demonic screams, the gateway to hell quote, and the so-called audio recording, all fabrications. The tape that circulated online was traced back to a loop mix of a sound effect allegedly lifted from a horror movie.
14 years before the famous Titanic sank into the North Atlantic Ocean, a man named Morgan Andrew Robertson wrote a book about a ship. The title of the book was Futility. The ship was a triple screw with very few lifeboats, but no one really worried. It was practically unsinkable. It was the largest ship ever created and could hold a capacity of 3,000 passengers and crew members. In the end, 2,500 passengers and crew boarded the ship. Then, one April night, moving at 25 knots, the ship struck an iceberg on its starboard side. It was in the North Atlantic when it sank, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. More than half of the passengers on board perished. The novel shares some uncanny similarities with the real-life sinking of the Titanic. Both ships collided with an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic Ocean. Both did not have enough lifeboats for all of its passengers. Even the sizes of both ships were roughly the same. But the strangest coincidence of all were the ships' names. The real-life one was the Titanic, but the one from the novel was named Titan. At the end of the day, though, these are just coincidences. Apparently Robertson, who was also a real person, was accused of precognition or clairvoyance, but even he denied such feats.
The Game Boy camera was a digital accessory released in 1998, allowing users to take photos and play minigames with their Game Boys. However, by selecting the Run option in the menu, users would trigger a disturbing event, a distorted face appearing on the screen, accompanied by the unsettling phrase, "Who are you running from?" Different versions of the Game Boy camera featured multiple eerie faces, each crudely edited with drawn-on features like fake hair, eyebrows, and symbols on their foreheads. The Creepypasta tries to link these images to a kidnapping by a cult, with the face marked by a black star representing the leader, while others bore wave symbols, supposedly indicating disciples. The final face, lacking any symbols, was theorized to be the victim. In reality, though, there is no confirmed evidence of the Game Boy camera being linked to any such crimes. The accessory was very real, though, as were the strange images and messages it would sometimes conjure up.
In 1970, a mother purchased a Raggedy Ann doll for her daughter Donna. Some days later, the two noticed that the doll would move on her own. Sometimes they would come home and find the doll in a completely different room or in a different position. In one instance, Donna noticed a blood-like stain on the doll. Frightened, they turned to a spiritual medium for help, and a seance was performed. According to the medium, the doll was possessed by a girl named Annabelle who tragically passed away as a child. Feeling sympathy for the spirit, Donna kept the doll, until one night, Annabelle seemingly struck again. Donna's roommate Angie was found dead in her bathroom with the words "Wanna play" written in blood across the wall. Eventually, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren took possession of the doll, declaring it an extremely dangerous entity. Today, Annabelle is housed in the Warren Occult Museum in a locked case, where she's said to still be active. Snapping back to reality, almost this entire creepypasta was taken from an actual paranormal investigation in the 1970s. Ed and Lorraine Warren are real people, and they supposedly received a Raggedy Ann doll from a student nurse who claimed it was acting strange. And yeah, the doll does reside in a real museum called the Warren Occult Museum. It was even the inspiration for the Conjuring movies. But like a lot of movies about paranormal things or based on a true story, its authenticity is widely debated. And skeptics argue that the events were exaggerated, faked, or fabricated.
The Smiling Man is a story about a strange encounter a person had during a late-night walk. The OP lived in a major US city, and one night, he encountered a man dancing from a distance. He was tall, lanky, and was wearing an old suit. He also had an incredibly wide smile plastered on his face. The OP walked away to cross a nearby street, and when he glanced back, he noticed that the Smiling Man stopped dancing and was facing him. As the OP continued to walk, the Smiling Man kept following him. Then, he began running towards him. Unnerved, the OP ran through the dimly lit street until the Smiling Man was nowhere to be seen. Afterwards, the OP never walked out late at night again and eventually moved away. While the Smiling Man is a creepypasta, it actually started as a Reddit post on r/Let'sNotMeet, a community for people to share their scary true encounters. The story was posted by user Blue Title, who during an AMA insisted that the story was based on a real encounter he had in Seattle, Washington. At the end of the day, it is just a story. But the idea of a strange encounter with a weirdo late at night in a big city isn't too outlandish.
In 1904, a bus transporting convicts had crashed, allowing the prisoners to escape into the nearby woods. Over time, authorities recaptured all but two, Marcus A. Walster and Douglas J. Griffin. As police continued their manhunt for these two, they would encounter mutilated and half-eaten rabbits throughout the area. Eventually, Marcus was found dead near Fairfax Station Bridge, clutching a crude weapon. However, the killings continued and Douglas was blamed for the carnage, earning the nickname the Bunnyman. The story takes a darker turn when, on Halloween night in 1905, 3 teenagers were found brutally murdered at the bridge. Their bodies were hung from the overpass of the Fairfax Station Bridge, so that their dangling legs were seen by oncoming traffic. Since then, the bridge had been dubbed the Bunnyman Bridge, and every few years, gruesome murders would occur there. The Bunnyman legend originates from 2 documented incidents in Fairfax County, Virginia in 1970. Historian Brian A. Conley researched the legend and found reports of a man in a rabbit costume threatening people with an axe. The first incident occurred on October 19, 1970, when Robert Bennett, a U.S. Air Force Academy cadet, and his fiancée were parked on Guinea Road in Burke, Virginia. Suddenly, their car window was smashed and a man in a white suit shouted at them about trespassing. As they fled, they found a hatchet inside their car. When questioned, the couple disagreed on whether the man was wearing long bunny ears. The second sighting happened 10 days later on October 29, 1970, when security guard Paul Phillips encountered a man in a gray, black, and white bunny costume at a construction site. The man chopped at a porch post with an axe, warning Phillips not to approach. Despite police investigations, no suspect was found, and the legend grew.
Unexplainable Photograph is the shortest creepypasta on the list, so for that reason we'll read it verbatim. This photo was taken on a mobile phone. The little girl you see crying refused to be a part of the group, as she said a little boy was scaring her. Thinking very little of her tantrum, the little girl's mother took the photo anyway. She later discovered what the child was crying about. Look closely at the knee-height space between the second and third girl from the left. That, I suspect, is the reason why the little girl was crying. The accompanying image is a classic ghost photo, which began circling the internet in the 2000s. It was taken by a 17-year-old Matthew Summers on his mobile phone as he and his friends prepared to head out. Like most ghost photos though, its authenticity is widely debated, and skeptics believe that the face is simply a result of humans being good at finding patterns and randomness.
In 2011, a user on 4chan's paranormal board posted a thread pointing to a strange address on Google Maps. When users navigated to the location, they found an eerie figure standing motionless on a second-story balcony. The figure appeared humanoid, tall, dark, and vaguely menacing. Theories began to spread quickly. Some believed it was a cryptid or some kind of entity watching passers-by. Others dismissed it as a mannequin or a surfboard rack designed to hold tiki decorations, but the mystery escalated when Google Street View later censored the image. The house became blurred and the figure vanished from public view. This only deepened the intrigue. Why would Google blur out such a harmless image unless there was something to hide? Eventually, the owner of the house stepped forward and revealed the truth. The figure was indeed a tiki-style surfboard holder mounted to the balcony railing. He explained that after the address went viral, he received unwanted attention, including visitors and concerns about potential theft. As a result, he requested that Google blur out the image to protect his privacy and property. The Red Room Curse is a Japanese internet legend about a mysterious pop-up that appears on a victim's computer, asking, "Do you like the Red Room?" Supposedly, the pop-up would kill any person it encounters. One day, a man named Eric was told about the urban legend by a friend of his, Ramsey. Curious, Eric went home to investigate online. Eventually, he stumbled upon the Red Room pop-up, and it showed him a strange list of names. Horrified, Eric realized that these were the names of people who have previously died. The final name was Ramsey. The story ends with a news report about Eric and Ramsey's deaths by their computer. Their walls were painted red with their own blood. The story gained notoriety due to its rumored connection to the Sasebo slashing, a real-life murder committed by a 6th grade girl in 2004. Some claim she was obsessed with a flash animation depicting the Red Room curse, though this link remains speculative.
Gloomy Sunday is a song composed in 1933 by Hungarian pianist and composer Rezo Serez. It gained international notoriety as the so-called Hungarian suicide song, due to claims that it supposedly drove dozens of people to take their own lives. According to the legend, the song's mournful melody and bleak lyrics struck such a deep emotional chord that it compelled listeners to end their suffering. Serez initially wrote the piece in an attempt to win back his ex-girlfriend. They briefly reunited, but soon after, she tragically died by jumping from his apartment window and leaving behind a note that simply read the song's title. The version of the song released to the public was edited, with rewritten lyrics that focused heavily on death and grief. Despite this, the melancholic tone remained intact. In 1968, Serez himself also died by suicide, which fueled the song's dreadful reputation. In reality, Gloomy Sunday is very much a real song, and Rezo Serez was a real Hungarian musician. His tragic death is a documented fact, but the claims surrounding the song's influence are widely considered an urban legend. At the time of its release, Hungary was suffering from famine, poverty, and political instability due to the Great Depression. Suicide rates were already unusually high. The song's release coinciding with these events gave rise to sensationalized media reports, particularly in the West, with exaggerated stories of mass suicides tied to the song. The story of Crybaby Lane involves a person named Jonathan, who was hired by Nickelodeon Studios as an intern. He was placed on the creative production team for an upcoming Nickelodeon movie. However, the director, Peter Lorre, wanted it to be as scary as possible, far beyond what is appropriate for children. Ideas involving death and cannibalism were suggested, and strangely, Jonathan was the only one to object. Then, in true creepypasta fashion, Lorre started to show pictures of dead children to his creative team, for some reason. Frightened, Jonathan was escorted out of the studio, and he never returned. The film, called Crybaby Lane, was eventually released by Nickelodeon, but was never seen again after its premiere. Crybaby Lane holds a special place in my heart because it was a lost movie, which the author of this creepypasta was clearly drawing from. Yes, the movie exists. Yes, there were rumors that it terrified audiences. And yes, it never re-aired after its Halloween premiere. But everything else is obviously fake. And when Crybaby Lane was found, it was nowhere near as violent as the pasta made it out to be. Nickelodeon must have caught on to this story because they promoted the re-airing of the film as their banned movie that was locked away for being too terrifying.
In the 1800s, Thomas Otto and his family moved to a mansion in Key West, Florida. One day, the family's servant, an unnamed woman, was caught practicing black magic. Before she was fired, she gave a doll to the Otto's son, Robert. The boy loved the doll and named it after himself. But soon afterwards, strange events began to occur, such as objects moving on their own and the sound of giggling heard throughout the house. Other servants began to quit out of fear, so Robert's parents hid the doll in their upstairs attic. Years later, after Robert inherited the mansion as an adult, he uncovered his childhood doll and began to play with it again. Soon after, Robert and his wife died due to mysterious circumstances. Eventually, a new family moved into the mansion, and they too reported strange events occurring. Robert the doll was deemed haunted and ended up being transported to the Martello Museum in Key West, where he sits perched in a glass box. While there's no verified evidence of supernatural activity, Robert the doll is very real and resides on display at the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida. He was indeed owned by a man named Robert Eugene Otto, but was purchased by his grandfather and likely given to him as a gift, rather than a magic-wielding housemaid. Funny enough, the museum has received tons of letters from visitors apologizing to the doll for disrespectful behavior, believing it caused them misfortune. Local legend asserts that the doll has supernatural abilities, but these are nothing more than tall tales.
An urban explorer travels to Disney's Emerald Isle in North Carolina to investigate the mysterious Mogwai's Palace. Rumor has it that it was supposed to be a Jungle Book-themed resort, but for some reason, Disney hastily shut it down. The narrator finds the site overgrown and vandalized, with "Abandoned by Disney" scrawled on its walls. As he ventures inside, things become increasingly unsettling. Eventually, he discovers a pitch-black room filled with decaying Disney props, including a Mickey Mouse costume with its colors inverted. Then, Mickey stands up, speaks in a distorted voice asking, "Wanna see my head come off?" As he pulls his own head, thick yellow blood spills out. Before the user can flee, he sees a message scratched into the metal above the door: "Abandoned by God." While Mogwai's Palace is fictional, Disney has some abandoned projects. In Florida, Discovery Island was once a Disney attraction open to guests from 1974 to 1999. Afterwards, it was abandoned and left to nature, with its buildings slowly decaying. Likewise, River Country, Disney's first water park, was shut down in 2001 and remains a untouched ruin to this day, with photos of its swampy remains circulating online. While not as sensational as the creepypasta, these real locations lend some credibility to the idea of a ghost park.
The story goes that Russian researchers in the 1940s tested a special gas on 5 subjects to keep them awake for 15 days. Known as the Russian Sleep Experiment, this creepypasta became one of the internet's most infamous horror stories. According to the tale, the subjects were political prisoners who were promised freedom if they could survive 2 weeks without sleep. They were placed in a sealed chamber, observed through microphones and small windows, with a constant supply of the gas. For the first 5 days, everything reportedly went as planned. But by day 9, the prisoners began to show signs of paranoia, delusions, and violent behavior. They screamed, tore apart their own flesh, and stopped eating. When researchers tried to intervene, the subjects violently resisted, begging to be kept awake. By the end, only one subject remained, and after being shot by one of the researchers, his final words were, "So nearly free." While the story is purely a work of fiction, some speculate that it may have been inspired by real or rumored events. During World War II, unethical human experimentation wasn't uncommon, particularly by the Nazis. The Soviets did experiment with sleep deprivation, but this was back in 1894 and on puppies, not political prisoners. The closest possible inspiration comes from Russian biochemist Grigory Marinovsky, also known as the Doctor of Death. In the 1940s, he experimented with numerous poisons on unsuspecting political prisoners, notably mustard gas. However, instead of researching sleep deprivation, Marinovsky was instead interested in eliminating Stalin's political opponents to be used in interrogations. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. My buddy Joel from the Let's Read YouTube channel, who's been a longtime collaborator of my channel, has his own podcast under the Ballin Studios. It's called A Twist of History, and it really has some next level storytelling and production quality. In fact, it's already ranked number 1 in all of the history podcasts. Go check it out wherever you listen to podcasts. The link will be down below.